14,000 years ago, a group of ancient humans in what is now modern-day Utah was sitting around a fire, likely exchanging stories, when they decided to do something unusual. They lit up wild tobacco leaves and inhaled the smoke. This moment is one of our earliest pieces of evidence for smoking, discovered in the form of charred plant remains and ash-stained pipes in the Great Basin region. So, why did these ancient people start smoking? And what drove such behaviors to spread and become a consistent part of human cultures across the globe? Let's dig into this fascinating question and see what drives this recurring human behavior. First up is the concept of cultural innovation, or in academic circles, sometimes referred to as behavioral modernity. This is the tendency of human societies to experiment and adopt new practices that might offer some value or pleasure. Around 14,000 years ago, some ancient peoples in the Great Basin began incorporating tobacco into their daily lives. The evidence suggests that they used it in social ceremonies and rituals, as the nicotine residues found in ancient pipes point to this specific plant's use. Tobacco, which was native to the region, became a staple in their cultural practices, and this innovation went hand in hand with their hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They likely discovered that the plant's psychoactive effects could alter perception and mood, creating a mystical experience or enhancing social bonds. A similar case can be observed with the Maya civilization thousands of miles away. The Maya were known to cultivate tobacco extensively by 600 CE, using it in both rituals and medicine. In this context, smoking was deeply intertwined with religious practices, believed to facilitate communication with the spiritual world. The Codex Madrid, an ancient Maya manuscript, is believed to depict gods smoking, showing its significant cultural value. This widespread use and cultivation suggests that the plant was much more than a mere stimulant. It was a cultural cornerstone. But here's where it gets tricky. Not every society adopted smoking with open arms or lungs. Take the example of the indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin. Despite an abundance of psychoactive plants in their environment, tobacco use was not universal. Some communities preferred other hallucinogens for their rituals, which raises the question of why tobacco spread so widely elsewhere. The difference lies in the adaptation and availability of plants, as well as cultural preferences that drove certain practices over others. By examining these patterns, we see that cultural innovation isn't just about adopting new practices. It's about integrating them into a society's way of life, shaped by the landscape and the values of its people. So, how did the ancient spread of tobacco influence societies on a broader scale? Let's turn to social cohesion, a concept also known in sociology as collective effervescence. It's the idea that shared practices bring people together, creating a stronger, unified community. This was especially true for the Ancestral Puebloans in the American Southwest, around 1000 CE, where tobacco was used in communal ceremonies. The Puebloans constructed kivas, large circular ceremonial structures, where people gathered for various ceremonies, chant, and share stories. These rituals fostered a sense of belonging and reinforced social ties within the group. Meanwhile, in the Andes, the Inca civilization had a different take on smoking for social cohesion. The Inca used coca leaves, which offer a mild stimulant effect when chewed or smoked, as part of their bonding rituals. By intertwining these plants with their societal functions, they built a network of shared experiences that linked people to one another. But this was not just about the intoxicating effects. It was about the communal experience that these rituals fostered. However, not all communal practices led to positive social cohesion. In some societies, smoking and the rituals surrounding it became symbols of power and control. For instance, in some Native American tribes, only the community's elders or leaders had the privilege of partaking in tobacco ceremonies. This set a hierarchy based on access to the practice, which highlights how social cohesion can morph into social stratification, depending on who controls the ritual. The complexities of social practices offer deep insights into how cultures evolve and sustain their identity over time. But how did these rituals endure through the ages and across continents? That brings us to geographic dispersal, often referred to as cultural diffusion in anthropological terms. This concept describes how cultural practices and ideas spread from one region to another, often along trade routes. When looking at the eastern woodlands of North America, we find tobacco pipes dating back to 1000 BCE, spread across a vast region. This suggests that as people traveled for trade or migration, they carried with them the seeds, or in this case, seeds and practices of tobacco use. Another fascinating example is found in the Polynesian cultures of the South Pacific. As these seafaring peoples voyaged between islands, they carried not only food and materials, but also tobacco seeds, spreading the practice and the plant to new territories. This geographic spread was facilitated by their exploration and migration habits, weaving tobacco into the fabric of new communities. But here's where the pattern gets interrupted. Some cultures simply didn't adopt tobacco, even when it was introduced. For instance, in ancient China, tea became the staple instead, aligning with their cultural values and practices, which revolved more around tranquility and meditation than communal intoxication. This highlights that while geographic dispersal can spread practices, it doesn't guarantee adoption if the new practice doesn't align with existing cultural values. Understanding these movements helps us piece together the puzzle of how smoking became both a global and uniquely local phenomenon, tied closely to the people and geography it encountered. But what about the human element behind these practices? How did individuals and their decisions shape these cultural trends? Finally, let's explore individual agency, what some scholars call personal choice theory. This concept centers on the decisions and actions of individuals as pivotal forces in cultural adoption. In ancient Egypt, for example, smoking was initially limited to the elite, who used pipes and other paraphernalia as status symbols. However, as these elites began to promote tobacco through personal choice, the practice filtered down through the social strata, becoming more widespread. The indigenous Arawak people of the Caribbean islands had leaders who, through their own choices, embraced and promoted tobacco's use for religious and medicinal purposes. As these leaders endorsed the practice, it gained traction among the broader population and became embedded within their culture. But, as you might expect, individual agency can also thwart the spread of a practice. In early European encounters with tobacco, there were vehement oppositions, such as King James I of England, who famously wrote a treatise condemning tobacco use as harmful and foolish. Despite these critiques, individual choices by traders and consumers who valued tobacco's novelty and effects helped the practice to eventually flourish in Europe. These individual choices were crucial in the broader landscape of cultural adoption or rejection, showing how personal decisions can have wide-reaching effects on society's practices and traditions. So how do all these dynamics bring us back to that ancient scene around the Utah campfire? Now, let's consider the concept of adaptive symbolism, which some anthropologists call cognitive recontextualization. This is where societies imbue a practice or object with new meaning to suit evolving cultural narratives. In the 16th century, European explorers brought tobacco back from the New World, where it was initially perceived as exotic and mysterious. By the early 17th century, its use had skyrocketed, but it wasn't merely the plant's novelty that secured its place in European culture. Tobacco was recontextualized as a symbol of sophistication and status, often depicted in the art and literature of the time as associated with intellectualism and social gatherings. In another instance, the indigenous peoples of the Great Plains in North America integrated tobacco into their spiritual ceremonies, viewing it as a sacred offering to the spiritual world. Tobacco was not just a plant to be smoked, it was a spiritual conduit, demonstrating how adaptive symbolism can transform an object's cultural role. The Lakota, for example, used the ceremonial pipe in their Sundance, a ritual that reinforced the cultural and spiritual values of their people. Yet adaptive symbolism can also lead to conflicts when cultural interpretations clash. Consider the 18th century debate in Ottoman Turkey, where tobacco use was both a symbol of defiance against traditional Islamic values and a marker of the empire's modernization. This tension between progress and tradition highlights how adaptive symbolism can serve dual purposes, reflecting both the continuity and change within societies. By analyzing adaptive symbolism, we see how smoking transcended mere consumption, evolving into a complex symbol that could convey multiple cultural narratives simultaneously. How does this layered symbolism continue to influence our understanding and practices today? The story of smoking's origins is one of innovation, social bonds, geographic spread, and personal choices, intertwining to create a human practice as diverse as the cultures it touched. That night around the fire in Utah highlights a moment of curiosity and experimentation, a small decision that would ripple through time and across continents. And it's through understanding these multiple layers that we gain a clearer picture of how such a simple act became a complex, global phenomenon, woven into the fabric of human history.